is quite a lot, and one also gets restless staying at home. How are you keeping? You must be very busy.
Actually, just doing a lot of things. I had spoken on 54 different subjects in more than 100 events in the last few weeks.
54.
Completely different subjects. So I'm enjoying this because this also stimulates your mind and brain a bit.
So I'm talking to him.
So it's already live on Facebook.
So
this is live on Facebook.
I can go ahead?
Yes, I'll just introduce.
Yeah. And then we go ahead. Yes. We are about to start.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, everybody. We have about 150 people joining us this evening. Thank you, Mr. Prabhu, for joining us and for giving us time this evening. And thank you, Sir, Mr. Ravi Singh. So just to kind of give a brief introduction, and then I will hand it over to the panelists. We have with us this evening Mr. Suresh Prabhu. He's the Member of Parliament, Rajya Sabha, and Mr. Ravi Singh, the Secretary General and CEO of WWF India. And the webinar is really looking at can COVID-19 really lead us to reimagine a climate resilient and sustainable future? Because this is the first time that we're dealing with a pandemic that is global in nature and unprecedented in its level of disruption. And while we're witnessing massive destruction and suffering on an enormous scale, what we really have to look at is how do we take these learnings from the COVID crisis to really set the global and the national climate trajectory forward and leverage opportunities to green the economy. So with that and with that brief introduction, I will hand over to Mr. Singh and to Mr. Prabhu to take this forward. The way we will run this is we will try and keep the freewheeling discussion for the first 30 minutes and then open it up to Q&A for about 20 minutes to all our various attendees. And then again, do a last 5-10 minute wrap up with closing statements from both Mr. Singh and Mr. Prabhu. So handing it over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Suresh Prabhuji, for this opportunity. We've discussed between us several times that there is a challenge that the globe faces, particularly India faces, my country faces, that it relates to climate change. And while we cannot blame everything on climate change, but it's a serious issue which has been with us and debated and actioned for the last 15 years or so, and perhaps in certain cases even more. Now, I would request that making use of the time and making use of your experience and of your guidance, let's talk about 2 or 3 major issues that are there, and I'll divide it into 2 or 3 parts. And really, it is a question that I will request you to answer or to comment on, and if there's something that I can supplement, I'll be happy to. Now, the first thing first 2 points I'd like to make is that the international dynamics for climate change seem to be veering. They're looking a little tired. And this matter seems to have taken like a second position on the podium, obviously because of the COVID-19 issue, but generally otherwise as well, because the action, the energy, all that was there earlier seems to be missing. That's one part. And within this, India, which has got a major impact as far as climate is concerned, when we look at it practically, I think in my country, so many positive actions are happening. So many good things are happening. So many people are trying to do so much at a small level, at an industry level, at an innovation level. How can we take this message across to the rest of the world and take leadership from our country in this particular phase? And this is over to you, Suresh Prabhuji.
Firstly, my dear friend Ravi, thank you very much for this opportunity. And always both have a common past, that both have been bankers. So you came from the background of a banking and working for WWF to build a deposit of good ideas and hopefully a bank that can lend those ideas to people without charging interest or even repayment obligation. And therefore, you have been there in a very important position. And WWF has been sharing and has been a common platform for bringing and converging so many environmental issues on one common place. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, sir.
Let me just respond to a very interesting two comments that you made. Let me come to the first one. You know, it's a very worrying thing. There is a silver lining and there is a dark cloud. So what is the silver lining? Silver lining is that because of Corona, there is a huge introspection going on in the world. People are thinking, was there anything that we did wrong that we have landed ourselves into this position as a humanity? This is first time we are thinking together as a humanity. Because there is no country which can claim to be immune from this virus. Virtually no country. And also, even during the debate on climate change or on so many other environmental issues, countries, particularly the rich countries, have been taking a very position of sitting on a high pedestal. That this is your problem. You know, you mess up things and then it happens. This is the first time you're seeing that probably the G20 countries, which account for 86% of the global GDP, in G20, the death rates are 90% of the world. Infections are 86% of the world. So just imagine the rich world seems to be more affected by the corona than the other ones. But I'm not talking about either silver lining or dark cloud into that. I'm just saying that first time there's an introspection that something must have gone wrong because we thought that we are immune from it, but we are not. We seem to be suffering because we are humans. And there is no other reason why we are suffering. So there is no reason that my per capita income is $50,000, so I will be immune. No. If my income may be anything, but capita, that is my per head. So if I have head, I am going to have a problem. So therefore, the bodies are suffering, humans are suffering. So that has brought us to a new thinking that did we do anything wrong? Or even better, the new thinking coming up is, should we change our path? And should we start doing something different than what we have been doing for so many decades or even more than a century? And therefore, how do we change it? That's one good thing, and that's a silver lining, in my opinion. And where is the dark cloud then? The dark cloud comes because ultimately, the climate change is a far more dangerous phenomena than COVID. Because COVID is a disease and it has now become pandemic. It has affected not only health, but also affected economy. So it's become completely a serious proportion. But still it's a disease. And human beings have, from millions of years, ever since the first human being started walking on the planet, they have suffered from it. But the challenge is, climate change is far bigger problem. This one vaccine might cure a disease. Medication might help you to reduce the ill effects of it. But climate change is a very dangerous phenomenon. It can destroy everything if you don't act properly. And that destruction will not just be confined to human beings, but will also cause destruction to the entire biological life. And that is what WWF is trying to protect, whether it is all beautiful biodiversity and everything else will be just gone. I mean, partly it has already gone. But the dark cloud is that despite this, the climate change would need action, and not all action, but good part of that action would also need financial resources. And now, because of this huge economic challenge, or economic, I would say, a catastrophe, the countries were refused to put in money. Like recently, India said that we need $1 trillion, at least $1 trillion for the poor country. Forget $1 trillion, I've seen over a period of time that billions of dollars which have been promised, not even $1 million has come. I was speaking jocularly that probably they're still counting because it's too large of money. So billions of dollars, so somebody must be still counting it, and one day we'll see the color of it. But problem therefore is that those financial resources required may not come at all. And this is what I've been seeing 2008 crisis onward. That as a banker, you know that that was a financial crisis, banking crisis, nothing to do with health per se. But because of that, countries were, particularly our friends in Europe and others, they wanted to save the bank, and there the priority went from saving the planet to saving the bank. And therefore, this is a big challenge. So I personally feel that today there is an opportunity in terms of some action will be there because people are thinking. But the sad part is that the money may not be available to match those good intentions, if at all their intentions are good. And that is a big problem. Also, the skeptics, and that is another, I would put it into the basket of the silver lining basket. So far, nobody disputed climate change. Nobody. The skeptics of climate change, what they were saying, there is a natural phenomenon. That it is changing, but nature changes always. So what is the great thing about it? And particularly our friends in the most developed country of the world, richest country, they were always refuting the science that was available on the subject and saying that it changes like that. The science was saying it's man-made, it's human-induced. The greenhouse gas emission that is happening is because of human action and nothing to do with the natural phenomena. The good part is now, it is proved beyond doubt. Why? Why, if it was not man-made, when the human action is stopped, there is no vehicles on the road, there are no aeroplanes in the skies, there are no more factories running, there are no more people going and living the lifestyle which was inducing this emission. Climate has, rather, the air has become better. The emissions have gone down. Doesn't it prove the point that these emissions are the cause of it and the emissions are by the human beings? So the climate change phenomena that we are seeing today is attributable directly to the people action. So that is one part. Now coming to India. Firstly, I must say, because I was environment minister, I used to lead India's delegation. Also, I led delegation when Mr. Prime Minister Vajpayee asked me to lead delegation when I was not environment minister. He asked me to lead a delegation for climate change when I was the power minister in Hague. So I went there, and then even then when we hosted it, I was actually leading India's delegation. I was doing that when we hosted way back, and Mr. Balu, I think, was a minister, T.R. Balu. Why I'm saying this? Then, of course, I've been involved with so many climate change organizations globally, and also been part of, along with you, the Track 2 dialogue on climate change with US and many others. So
Yes.
India has been doing quite a lot, as you correctly pointed out, despite the fact that it is disproportionate to the resources available to us within the country. We are doing it beyond our means. For example, there are two people fall sick. One who is a billionaire and one who is a daily wage earner. Now both have to put money for the medical care. But if a poor person puts money for a medical care, he's putting disproportionate size of his income for medical care. Whereas a billionaire put money for medical care, it is just a fraction or even something which he does not even factor into as any loss to him, because that's a very minor part of his expenditure. Now, India has a very unique distinction. It is $2.9 trillion economy, so fifth largest. But at the same time, we are the largest number of poor in the world. And when we are diverting resources from addressing that part of social challenge of poverty into fighting with climate change by changing some resources into that, it's a big challenge for us. But despite that, we are doing it. We are changing our energy mix in a very substantial way. 100,000 megawatts of solar, 75,000 megawatts of wind, and that too, the target is in the next 2-3 years. Just imagine, it's a massive change of resources. And energy mix, which I think nowhere in the world you can see a shift of energy mix of this magnitude in such a short period of time. Secondly, energy efficiency. I'm very happy to say that when I was a Minister of Power, I had initiated an energy efficiency bill in the Parliament. And that bill I created, because as the Minister of Power in Atal Bihari Vajpayee's cabinet, we created a Bureau of Energy Efficiency. Since then, we have actually taken huge initiatives to address issues related to efficiency aspect. So over a period of time, energy intensity and carbon intensity of our economy has improved very well. In fact, energy intensity has improved considerably. Of course, also thanks to the high cost of power, people are shifting to less energy, but also because of regulation through Bureau of Energy Efficiency. So we are done on efficiency matter. We have improved public transport significantly. You can see Delhi used to be hell. Now, I'm not saying it has become better. It has not yet become heaven. But Delhi, when the time when we're talking about quality of air, I remember Dr. Anil Agarwal, when I was the Minister of Environment in 1998, used to come and meet me and talk and complain about the quality of air. Since then, public transport, not only in Delhi, but in many important cities of India has improved, or there is a lot of under construction. So public transport has improved. So I think over a period of time, we have made significant strides. So that is purely, I would say, from a demand perspective side also, but also from another side, adaptation. I think we need to do a lot more. And that is why when we go and talk about money, it is not a begging bowl that we go to. We go it as a right of the developing countries to get that part of money, which is partly compensating for the losses we are suffering for no fault of us. So we are not cause of climate change. I always say we are victims of climate change. We are not a cause of it. And because we are victims, it's a right to get compensation. Even you buy a car, you have to take third-party insurance. Because if you're driving a car and somebody is hit by the car, then whoever is the regulatory body, the court, will decide that you have to give him compensation. So insurance company will pay because of this. So compensation is given as a right. It is not that you can say that person was dead, he was hit my car, see, I was so magnanimous, I gave him money. No, you have to give him because you are right. You have the right to receive it. His relatives are right to receive it. So same way, polluter to pay principle applies, which is accepted globally now. That cause of climate change is definitely proven to be attributable to those countries whose emissions have been high historically. Again, some people like to confuse it by saying, oh, but your global emissions, not per capita emission, India is still low. Global emissions of India are rising. But that is besides the point. That is what we want to do. And that's why I just mentioned to you a number of measures that we are taking to reduce future emissions. But point is the climate is not changing because of today's emission or going to be changed because of future emission. It is changed because of past emissions. That's a historical responsibility, which nobody can deny. And this is something I'm not inventing today. It is not India's proposition. This is part of United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change, which is where it is a cardinal principle that historical emissions are there, and that's the science has proved beyond doubt. So I'm saying India is doing a lot, but I'm worried because climate change issues cannot be addressed by local action alone. It is absolutely necessary, like what India is doing, all other countries should do. India can do more, I agree. But unless we reduce the global emissions or the world as a whole, whether it is whatever particulate part per million we can decide, 450 whatever number is acceptable to the scientists as well as to the leaders. But if we don't do that globally, that's why we need global action plan. We had that Paris Agreement. So we never knew who walked into Paris and who walked out of Paris. So Paris is still there, but some countries have walked out of it. So
there's something that's coming up which is constant. We also have to see climate change from a public or a common point of view, from the common man or the popular readership. Quite often the terminology that is used is very complex. So there's a responsibility on us, to simplify that. But at the same time, we must also explain some of the correlation, because crops are being affected because of climate change. In Sundarbans recently, although you can't blame it all on climate change, but the continuous disasters that come by the cycle of cyclones, and these are really cycles over many years, they convert large parts of the Sundarbans into saline. The agriculture has to adapt to saline water conditions. Similarly, many parts of northern India suffers from agricultural, the agriculture suffers because of changes in brought by climate change. There are some long theories which somehow require proper study and proving. For instance, we are faced with a locust swarm at this point of time. The locusts have usually emanate from a part of Arabia or the Horn of Africa. And because of the changes in the Indian Ocean, it is said that there have been 2 continuous cyclones in that area, which brought about the resuscitation of this species to some extent, which is cyclical and periodic. And the swarm has started moving east towards and has now entered India in a big way. Luckily, our crop has been harvested. We expect that there will be less impact on us, but at the same time, whatever the less be, it is an impact. And now we will go into the Kharif crop and the moisture will come and all that. Now, ultimately, this is a result directly or indirectly of climate change. And similarly, other things are happening. Now, don't we need to do more adaptation? You mentioned adaptation. Don't we need to do more adaptation even for the people who you know well of, the coastal communities of India? Shall we not work more to come to a certain level, almost at a micro level, to help these people and communities in such situations? And I think we need to, I know that several state governments are working on this. At the same time, I think we need to talk about this more in the press. We need to write more about it. We need to talk to people about it, saying that you are doing so much, you can do more. And not all of this is requiring technology and inputs from outside India. We have our own inputs and we have our own science and we have our own expertise for this basis. I just thought I'd throw this comment to you and request you to give it some thought and some guidance and counsel.
You know, you're absolutely right. I always maintain that if climate change is a certainty, then adaptation is a necessity. Why? Because even today, if we stop all the emissions by some divine intervention and we stop, even then climate change is going to happen for the next few decades. So therefore, the ill effect of climate change will be felt for a fairly long period, even if the world community succeeds in reducing the emission to a manageable level. Therefore, adapting to that change is a necessity. Now, there are 2 aspects, a mitigation aspect, which comes from energy mix changes and other things which will mitigate the emissions. And that will have a good positive impact for future, no doubt about it. But climate change, past effect will require adaptation to many forms. And you mentioned a few of those. One is agriculture. See, today in Delhi and in north part of India, particularly in Punjab and Haryana, which are major grain producing countries, and particularly the wheat producing part of the country, the wheat cannot sustain heat going beyond 2 degrees centigrade.
Right.
So some of the crops will be not necessarily to locust, but whether locusts come or not, when locusts at that time may not even come because there is nothing to be eaten. But the problem would be therefore adapting to climate change, particularly agriculture, is going to be a major issue. And as you know, a good part of India, the wheat is a staple food. So we need wheat-based, whether bread of different kinds, roti, paratha, whatever we eat, but bread is going to be the major food basket of India. And if it is affected, we'll have a big problem. So adaptation to climate change, we need to develop certain varieties of crop, which will be climate proof, climate resistant, heat resistant. That is one part. The second bigger part is the water. Agriculture will need more water. And in today, when we have almost 86% of the water going into agriculture, so hardly anything is left for other sectors of India's social life. And if we are going to need more water, it's a problem. But more importantly, the water itself will be a challenge. So one is the demand side, that is what agriculture and other sector will have demand on water. But because of climate change, the supply of water itself will be under threat. And therefore, why is it under threat? And that is what you just mentioned. I want to highlight the point that you made a very good reference to. That is so-called natural disaster that are facing us today. It is true that natural disaster has been there till nature has been there. Whether you call it disaster or what, nature's own way of acting on it. But again, the scientists had a focus on this, that the frequency and the intensity of natural disasters will rise because of climate change. So when we were hit by a very super cyclone, kind of a cyclone which has hit us very badly, particularly in the eastern part of India and particularly the state of West Bengal and also Orissa and Bangladesh to some extent, the fury of nature is, of course, has been there, but the frequency and the intensity has increased. So now the water will be, if there is no water, most of the water comes from what? From rainfall, from monsoon. And if the rainfall pattern changes, which again is a focus by the scientists, that there will be too much water for some time and there is no water for a long time. So where is the storage in India? So if you don't have a storage, which comes from natural storage, which comes in the form of ponds, lakes, rivers, everything. But those water bodies, despite we being convention to Ramsar Convention, because of huge population pressure of so many decades, our water bodies have made way to the so-called development, whether it's form of development of buildings, infrastructure, many others. But Bangalore is a good example. It should be the city of lakes. And now the lake has to be seen in a city, so we have to use a microscope. Now, why we have reached a phenomenon like this is because population has increased, demand has increased, and the water bodies also need land. So land has been taken over. Now the problem that is going to come is, and a big problem, that adaptation, why is it necessary, is that we'll have to meet more storages. To store a water which is going to come in short span of time and may have to be used in long period of time. For that, we'll have to rebuild our storages, which are traditionally there, like Rajasthan is a shining example of how water management should happen, because there was hardly any water they used to get because it's a desert state, but they have still managed it. I think we'll have to restore the old water bodies. We'll have to also dig some of the abandoned wells. In fact, I'll tell you very interestingly, when I was the railway minister, there was a big problem. So we gave water to Latur, which is in Maharashtra, by train. And we actually helped them in a big way. I then told all the railway general managers it was a responsibility, like a key result area for them to produce the result on that. Find out, because railway is big landlord, probably the biggest landlord after defense. So I said, please find out which were their water bodies under your control in a particular zone. And then try to restore those water bodies. Because that water bodies, then we'll be able to get water and store it in a proper manner, in a natural way. But the point is, adaptation is going to be important. But I will tell you a challenge on adaptation. 1998, I had first time, I prepared a paper on, like a white paper on India's environment. Probably first time India did it as a government. In that, I had put cost of adaptation. First time, very conservatively, about 4% of GDP at that time, conservatively.
4%
of GDP. So, and it was 22 years ago. At that time, the effect of climate change was not adverse as they are today. So, and the population has increased. The risks have increased. So, what is the adaptation? You are adapting to the risk. So, risks have increased. So, what is therefore is important is, and I agree with you, we need to do more on adaptation, 100%. But to do that, we need more resources. And that's where this question, when we ask for money, this comes in. So actually, this is something which is emanating from a felt need. It is not a begging bowl, but it is asking for partly compensation, because even that, whatever the money they give will not be sufficient to take with adaptation. Then other part of adaptation is to deal with natural disaster management. All our infrastructure, particularly the one which is built in the past, will have to be climate proof. Where
Yeah.
are we climate proof? So today, just imagine the losses suffered by West Bengal who run into tens of thousands of crores.
Right.
So where are they going to find resources? So of course, you cannot expect West Bengal or Odisha or even Bangladesh for that matter, because their ability to create a climate-proof infrastructure which is already built in the past is not there, because that will also need money. So this is going to be a big challenge, and therefore adaptation would need supplementary efforts from the countries who have caused the climate change.
Would you, I have one or two other points which we could take towards the end. In the meantime, would you like to take some questions, Suresh Babu?
Yeah, please, of course.
Would you like
Okay.
to? Ritu,
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Yes.
will you do the questions or?
Yes, sir. So, sir, if somebody, so everybody who's on the webinar, if you can please put up your hand, and then I can just allow you to talk, because the webinar doesn't allow you to talk automatically. And so Ananya, sorry, if somebody could put up their hands, and then I could kind of come to you and start asking questions. Okay, so Gaurav, if you could introduce yourself and then ask the question, please. Gaurav, go ahead.
Gaurav is on mute.
Hi, I'm Gaurav. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, Gaurav, you're audible. If you could introduce yourself and then ask the question.
Sure. So good afternoon, sirs. Thank you for the session. I am working with a financial institution. I also head the CSR function, and we are working on climate change mitigation with WWF amongst a lot of other organizations in India. Our focus is on biodiversity and trying to arrest climate degradation in farmlands with for the tribal people. So what I would like to ask and put forth is that while people seem to be more aware of what is happening in terms of climate and impact on our food security, on our living standards, yet we see that large projects, even during the COVID time, are being approved with the impacted people unable to even respond to those projects being approved, in the sense that we're seeing standards being relaxed. We're seeing the ability of people to even portray or put forth their points being reduced. They don't have opportunities because of COVID. We're seeing relaxation of those standards that once upon a time existed.
I think, Gaurav, we've got the point. I'm certain opportunities will be there, but I suggest that maybe Suresh Prabhuji just answer some of these points, please.
Yes. See,
or maybe
point is very well taken. In fact, it is like this. Then if you are constructing a building in an earthquake-prone area, how do you make a building? You make it earthquake-proof, right? Like in case of Japan, earthquake is very frequent phenomena. But buildings don't fall there much. As a result of that, the loss to property as well as to human life is less, because people die out of earthquake not because of earthquake per se, because of structures falling, and under the debris people die. So therefore, they've developed a structure which is earthquake proof. Now, if we are living in a world where the climate change is a reality, then we have to build climate change proof infrastructure. We'll have to factor all that issues into it. I remember in 98, again, I'm remembering my days as an environment minister 22 years ago. I had said, why not every ministry in the government of India has a financial advisor? I said, why not we have every ministry an officer who will be ecology advisor? So what will happen? While we frame a project, we'll enshrine the concerns of environment into it ab initio, at the beginning itself, which will prevent from subsequent challenge to it in the court or something else, and will not stall the project. Communities will benefit. In any case, the project has to happen because this is felt need. You know, nobody builds project for no logical reason. But if that project logic is there, but if it is done better by involving all the issues related to particularly the climate change, and as it is proved, Just imagine if you construct infrastructure on the coastline, and we are 7,600 long coastline, and a typhoon or a cyclone of the type that hit recently all of us, if it is going to hit an entire infrastructure, gone. So have you benefited? The logic for project itself is then defied by project not being there, because even after construction, so money has gone and benefits of the project don't come. So we must do it like we do it for earthquake. We have to build climate resilient, climate proof infrastructure. And therefore, all aspects of that infrastructure, whether you are constructing bridges, they will have to take into that. We are constructing power station, we'll have to make inbuilt into that. You know, today, some part of West Bengal is still without power today. Why? Because of the sub-transmission and distribution network, particularly even transmission towers, power generating stations are in operation. So what does it mean? That is a basic need for a country today is to power. So we must build future power infrastructure, which is climate resilient, climate proof. So this is an important aspect, and therefore all project planning, project implementation tools will have to factor all such concerns into it.
Ritu?
Thank you, sir. Sir, there are 3 more questions before we go into the next round. There is a question from Mr. Hamid, who is saying, how can we link climate change and local weather calamities? And therefore, how important is behavior change in this scenario?
Okay. Question.
Sorry, what is the question?
The question is, how can we link climate change and local weather calamities? And therefore, what is the role that behavior change plays in such a scenario?
Local level?
Look, like climate change is a bigger issue. Now we get a cyclone like Amphan, or we get very heavy rain in one part of the country, like in Bombay, we got rain.
Yeah.
You know, then there doesn't seem to be any logical correlation to many of these things coming together.
Achha, this is what you are saying.
And then how can you adapt people towards this?
Achha, see, firstly, climate change is a part of global change. Global change is a much bigger phenomenon than climate change. Now, I fully agree that everything cannot be blamed on climate change. And that is why the skeptics always keep finding fault that you are using climate change as an alibi to stall something, which is always the case. So I fully agree. I am not even saying that even Mumbai rains have something to do with climate change. Absolutely not. Mumbai, when I was a young boy, our school used to start on 7th of June. And normally the rains in Mumbai, around the 7th June time, around maybe 7th June is Sunday, it will start on 8th June. But around that time, the first week of June. And when also the rains used to come around the same time. Like, it is something very interesting that our calendar keeps changing because we follow sun calendar, moon calendar, whatever it is, lunar calendar, where we change it. But Sankranti comes on 14th or 15th of March every year. So rain is to come around the 7th of June because that was the climate change not that badly affected. So the weather pattern had not changed so badly. So that time also rain is to come and streets to be flooded. Point is, therefore, nothing to do with climate change. But Mumbai needs to adopt for a different reason. Because it's on both sides is coastline. So sea level rise is going to be an inevitable consequence of a climate change because melting of glaciers will go there and sea level rise will happen. So Mumbai has a very, very big risk coming from that. So adaptation has to happen from that side. But I fully agree that climate change is an opportunity to also factor in some of the associated risks like this. That whether we are adapting to climate change or not, isn't it a good idea that we increase and upgrade the infrastructure of Mumbai in such a way that the ill effects of flooding will not happen? So this is something which is always good. See, whether today, whether you have got corona or you don't have corona, but is it not a good idea to wash hands? Is it not a good idea to live a healthy lifestyle? So climate change gives us an opportunity to bring in fresh thinking of doing something which is not necessarily to adapt to climate change itself, but it's a good practice that we follow. So in a way, we are adapting, it is part of adaptation strategy, but not necessarily because of climate change, but because climate change has stirred that new thinking in our mind that why not we do something better. So these are living life better in accordance with what are the good best practices, as you can say, for living life.
Ritu, can we have 2 questions, please?
Yes,
Because
yes, sir. We have 3 more questions actually lined up. Aditi is asking a question and saying, an international study revealed that India's emissions dropped by 26% and global emissions dropped by 17% between Jan to April this year. How can we sustain that?
Ravi, what are the emissions, India's emissions are?
so
An
India's
international
emissions,
study revealed that India's emissions dropped by 26%.
Yeah.
Global emissions dropped by 17% between Jan and April this year.
Yeah.
And how do we therefore sustain this?
Yeah. So, you know, of course, obviously, the fall of emission depends upon the fall in economic activity, the constraints that have been put on social movements. So all of that will contribute to fall in the emissions. So it is, when we are comparing why it has happened globally so much, we have to compare apples with apples and not oranges with apples. So unless we understand that same level of confinement that has happened in one part of the world, if it has happened in the same part in other parts, it will depend upon that. One. Secondly, what is important is that the baseline. Are the baselines comparable? In a sense that emissions are comparable in terms of numbers.
right?
But what is the source of emission? Where was it coming from? And where that source has been confined and constrained to operate in a particular given environment. So therefore, it is really changing, very difficult to give conclusive answer to say this has happened because of this. We have to completely compile it and find out. But point is still a very good emanating idea from this is that human action was a cause of it. That nobody can deny it now anymore. Even our friends who have been challenging climate change on the ground that there's nothing to do with human emission. And this is what I said in the beginning. So this is a good part of it. That now everybody must accept the fact that confinement of human activity has resulted into better rivers or skies, or even the other day, human beings saw a snow leopard after a long time in Central Asia. So this is really something very interesting. Then we have been seeing pictures. People from Ludhiana are able to see the peaks of Himalaya. So this is something very clear. There's no doubt about it. Irrefutable evidence, which scientists have always been saying. So my friends who have been doubting of climate change or even saying that these are fake, this is a smokescreen, something like that. All of them must accept the reality that climate change is real and also happening because of human action.
Thank you. Ritu?
So we have a lot of questions coming up.
I think we have time for 2 because we need to
Yes.
talk about 1 or 2 other points.
Yes. So a quick question from Bhavna Prasad from WWF. And she says, how do we integrate green and resilient economy aspects as part of WWF, as part of India's current economic recovery efforts? So how do we integrate?
Just repeat the question clearly, please.
Can you, Ravi, I can hear you better because I think that what is the question?
How do we integrate green
if you
and
can just
resilient?
tell Ravi can just say. I think
Basically, how do we integrate the green resilience or the resilience of better environment practices and structures into the larger plan of India? I mean, whatever we plan, whether it's a low carbon economy or whether we change our cities to become more, how do we do this?
Actually speaking, one is to call it by that nomenclature, that I am greening my plan, for example. This is what the nomenclature is.
Right.
But other way to look at it is, which we just discussed in the morning, even rather earlier in the debate, and Ravi also mentioned about it, is that India has done a lot on this count. Actually, see, just imagine changing energy mix. Is it not greening budget? Or creating smart cities in which smart ideas will be integrated wherein all kinds of green initiatives will be integrated into them, whether related to waste management, waste disposal, whether it is related to transportation, whether it is related to resource planning. See, this is very important. The greening of plan would need to have a very important aspect, that is resource, how you deploy the resources. Because the green resources, as we call it, the natural capital of the country, is not infinite. So unless we have an integrated plan to resource efficiency, resource optimization, resource recycling, so all of these ideas will get integrated into the plan. The good part is, thanks to Prime Minister Narendra Modi's initiative of, say, Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, for example, it has brought in a new dimension into the issues related to cleanliness, but has a positive impact on greening part of it. So some of it, which I'm saying, is that you may not really appreciate it in the context of the per se, it is greening. So you can put it in the basket of greening and then you can list all the issues, or you can look them as already taken initiatives which are already could have been part of the green basket. So we are not doing badly on that count. Of course, if you ask me, the ideal situation is not the one that is possible in a given context. One is, as I told you, because of the kind of resources that we need to do. Secondly, we may have to discard our already creating infrastructure and probably discard it. For example, our coal-based plant, which is not possible because which is half of the power generation comes from coal plants. So it is not feasible, possible in a short period of time. But the opportunity comes in the form, and that's what we have been saying earlier also, that new infrastructure that will create could be created with all climate and green initiatives integrated into it. In fact, I've always been saying that in a way, the good part of India's infrastructure running into a few $1 trillion is yet to be built. So there we can integrate all those ideas. And this is what is happening. So my point is, you're right, we have to do it, but partly it is happening and much part of it had to be done.
Ritu, one more, please. You have to choose, or you tell, I'll relay it on.
Okay, so I'll pick up a question that's very, very relevant right now. So Ratul from our Sundarbans team is basically talking about rebuilding lives and livelihoods as a part, as after the cyclone. So he's saying the missed opportunity is account of conventional rebuilding that does not make the lives and livelihoods any less vulnerable. So he's saying, what would you suggest in terms of, what do you mean in terms of resilient rebuilding? What does that encompass?
Okay, so let me give the background. This Ratul is a colleague of mine, much respected colleague. He works in Sundarbans in the field, and he works with communities, and he works with on conservation related matters, and also building resilient infrastructure, agriculture, monitoring tigers and other things. So he is asking that again and again we see a cyclone coming and devastation happening. We had cyclone Aila. It took us many years to rebuild back, and again we have gone back to something worse. Now, is it not possible to have this green resilience built at a level of a smaller community so they are able to withstand this and recover their lives earlier than later? I know it's very easy to ask this kind of question, but for those who see this in front of them and those who work on the ground and feel for the people in the communities in this way, have to come and ask these kind of questions, and somehow we have to find solutions for this. This is what I thought.
See, I would say that what you're saying is a part of a broader vision that we must adopt, which is a distributed creation of infrastructure, not centralized infrastructure. Once we have a decentralized infrastructure, it will always have less vulnerability to the risks that are associated with particularly that part of topography of India, like Sundarbans, where it is very vulnerable. Now, just give an example of how it could be. Rather than putting see now I said that in West Bengal, power is a big problem today because whole infrastructure is gone. Suppose it was a decentralized one. If it was a distributed generation and distribution of electricity, it would still be affected, but not the entire area will not be affected. It will be localized. So therefore, the possibility of repair and rescue operation can be even better in terms of that. Then the other part would be, that is what is necessary. We have to train people locally to repair it. Now today, to repair an infrastructure of its kind, we need very specialized people who have to be flown in from different parts of the country or different parts of the state to take care of it. Suppose it was a resilient infrastructure which was created for local community, and a local community had the ability to do it, it would have been better. Now the good part, and that opportunity was not there because if you're putting up coal plant of 2,000 megawatts, it was not possible to build like this. It is solar power, wind power. This is possible because in fact the solar and wind power are locally available resources. If the coal is available only in eastern part of India and far away, and then we also, for good environment reason, we said that it should be, coal plant should be built at pithead. Rather than transporting the coal, will transmit the power. So, and that makes sense. But today, in a situation like this, where Sundarbans particularly, I stayed few evenings in the river of Sundarban actually, and I've stayed there and I've seen the tiger there. So and one of the most beautiful area of the world, I would call it. And the mangrove, there's no better mangrove forest than Sundarbans anywhere in the world, I would feel. And I've been to most of the forest of the country or the world also. But I feel therefore, is what you are saying is absolutely right. But to do all this is what is going to bring in a lot of things. See, one part of this is that Constitution has also now created a system wherein local communities will have a right about local development. Now we'll have to take a further step and resource allocation, which actually happened about 2 finance commission before this, where they gave money directly to the local self-government. I think we'll have to increase. But the point is, problem when it comes in is like, just imagine today's corona. All resources are diverted into fighting this. So this is a problem. Therefore, I'm saying point is well taken. I fully agree with you. At the same time, the practical difficulties faced by us have to be properly surmounted to reach that.
So, Ritu, we'll come to the third part, the last part of this, which will be brief.
Yes, sir.
So, if there are questions that are others, if you could make a note of those.
There is a lot of questions that I'm making.
So we can take a note of them, and we could pass it on to Mr. Suresh Prabhu's office and see what we could do with responding to these people.
Absolutely.
But I have 2 things to comment on what you just said, Suresh Prabhuji. Number one, about microgrids. In Sundarbans, we are receiving information that some of the microgrids have survived this entire Holocaust. The larger grids may have failed in certain larger areas, urban areas around it, but microgrids seem to have survived. And by another 2 or 3 days, we'll get actual information on the ground to what extent it is there. I know for a fact that out of the 7 microgrids that we know, 4 of them are still working. 1 has been brought back by the local community to generation, exactly like you're saying. And for the others, we'll come to know in 1 or 2 days what the status is. So it actually proves your point, what you're saying here. But I will just request you for one more aspect that you must apply, we must try and apply our minds to. In climate change, just like India developed this thing about a solar alliance, and we brought many countries together into this. And knowing that there are the spread of diseases caused by climate change, not necessarily COVID, but a lot of other diseases that have come into the sphere in the last 10 years or 15 years. Does it make sense for India to establish leadership for research and development on medical science, where we could have a coalition with like-minded countries, whether they are developed countries or not developed countries? Perhaps here is a question of bringing people together researching for solutions and applying those solutions just like the way we were able to do it in one or two other pandemics that occurred in the past. I just thought I'd throw this idea to you. Is it possible for India to work on this?
See, firstly, this International Solar Alliance is Prime Minister Narendra Modi's own initiative. I'm not saying because, as a Prime Minister, but even when he was the Chief Minister of Gujarat, he had actually requested then Prime Minister of India to actually take up this idea. But then, of course, he has to actually personally become the Prime Minister to take this idea forward, and it has now reached a very good level. International Solar Alliance has so many members from developed countries, developing countries, from almost all continents. It's a very good development. On healthcare, sadly, healthcare was a very neglected subject, particularly the public healthcare. Public health was not as prominent a subject for discussion globally till COVID happened. And now I think there is going to be bound to be a very serious rethinking and probably bringing it on the top of the table. To do that, we need alliances, as you correctly said, for Discover. And also there are various aspects of it. Let me tell you, we need alliance, and which actually Prime Minister has been saying in G20 forum. I had also said it in Saudi Arabia recently when I went there before I self-isolated myself. I also asked for one is surveillance system. Can we not identify a disease when it is localized before it becomes a pandemic? So we need a global surveillance system. We need global early warning system. Then we also need vaccine and medication. And of course, the best possible healthcare system which can be shared globally. And maybe suppose somebody is infected somewhere, can we not use the modern technology of telemedicine and actually solve that problem locally before it becomes a pandemic? So now, there I agree with you, we need a global coalition. The challenge is, we didn't have a body for solar. So International Solar Alliance became a good idea. But we have a body called WHO. So if you try to work outside of WHO,
that's a challenge.
Converting a UN body, and which is not a good idea at this particular point of time, wherein we need multilateral institutions to take charge of the global affairs. Global healthcare management is a governance issue. And that's where I think early warning system, development of new medicine, which is a response to it, but preventing part of it. How do you prevent a disease from becoming a global pandemic? This is something which needs a global governance system. So I think point is well taken. Global action is called for, but whether global action should be outside of already created multilateral institutions like WHO is something we need to think very seriously.
We're coming to the end of our discussion and talk. I must thank you for your tremendous insight and I mean, very clearly the humanity that you express, the care and the kind of things that you express in your counsel, your opinions and your wisdom. I would request that if it is possible, maybe we should have another such session sometime in the future where we could change the format a little bit. I could get more questions from people who would like to ask certain things that may not be clear and clear to them, and then perhaps put it the other way around if necessary. But that is something for the future. I very much am concerned, and I appreciate your guidance and drive in the fact that climate change is still middle and center of a big problem, and that we should not let it come to number 2 on the podium, irrespective of many challenges that we face. And hopefully that part will come back, that significance will come back in the next few months to follow after we overcome the present challenge and this COVID-19. I'd like you to say a few words, Suresh Prabhuji, before we end. Thank you.
Ravi, firstly, again, using this opportunity to thank you and WWF for giving this opportunity. And responding to your suggestion, I would be very happy to do another session as early as possible, maybe 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now. And that time we'll only start with questions and answers. So people can ask
Right.
questions and I will just keep responding them, and we can say 60-minute program, we can answer as many questions as possible. On the other part of it, I think climate change is a cause of problem for many sectors. It's a threat to human life, biological life. But today, climate change itself is an existential threat as a subject of public policy. People want to forget it. People don't want to accept it. Because when you accept it, then you have to pay for it. Suppose if you are driving a car and jump the signal, then you don't want to look at a cop, because then you'll have to pay, probably will give you a ticket and you'll have to pay for it. So you want to deliberately ignore the signal of climate change, which is threatening us. So it should be a responsibility of the public at large, public opinion globally, to ensure that we don't allow that to be relegated to the second or third or even nowhere. It will just go out of sight. We should not let that happen, because even if we let that happen, then we are going to be facing that problem. Like it's same thing which people say that if you had ignored this as a threat to public health globally, actually the consequences you are facing today. Thanks to our Prime Minister, he started acting early. But just imagine the problem of that. So I think we must make sure that eyes on the ball are not taken off. Otherwise, lose the wicket. And I think we cannot afford to lose the wicket, because just losing wicket, the other batsmen come and play, or that batsman gets second inning to play. But here we have no second life, and we cannot replace one life with another life, because every life is precious. So we must save those lives by ensuring that we don't take our eyes off the ball, keep focusing on climate change as an issue and various aspects of it. We didn't get time to talk about technology aspect of it. We didn't get time to talk about forest and the carbon sinks part of it. We didn't get time to talk about the impact of social life. How is it going to impacting? The loss of jobs that will happen because of climate change, particularly in the fisheries sector, in aviation, in tourism sector, because the coastline goes. So all of that are various aspects. Therefore, we should not lose sight of climate change. And Ravi, I am very happy that we could have such a fantastic discussion. I look forward to doing that as early as possible, but maybe next 2-3 weeks, because as I told you, I've done 54 different subjects I've spoken to on the last few weeks, and I have another quite a few subjects to be already committed. But this is my passion. I was doing one PhD on climate change in Freie University Berlin. So even academically, I'm interested in, but even the application part of it, I'm working on it in my own constituency, where I was elected 4 times to Lok Sabha. I've done so many adaptation measures with local communities, 2,000 villages. So I would be very happy to share all these ideas in future. So we look forward to that. And I think it's a very engaging discussion that we had today. I would like to have even more involved participation in the next round that when we'll have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Namaskar. Thank you.